I'm Denise.
She's a non-fiction editor, and I'm Louise.
She's a fiction editor. And together,
we're the Editing Podcast. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Editing Podcast.
Hello. So we're delighted to welcome an author guest this week, and it's one of Louise's clients. Be afraid, Harnby. Be very afraid.
I know. Now I know how you felt when we talked to Kendra MacDonald.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're absolutely thrilled to have an independent author on the Editing Podcast, and it's the wonderful David Unger. David and I have been working together for a few years now, and I love line editing for him. So this week we're talking to David about story creation and revision. So hello, David.
Hello, and very happy to be here with you today.
Oh, it's great to have you. So, David, can you first tell listeners quickly where you live and what else you do for a living?
I can do that. I live in Southern California, and I have a PhD in psychology, so I have a little bit of a therapy practice, but mostly I've been an educator. And I taught graduate students sort of how to do therapy. So my two main occupations are educator and therapist, and more recently, author.
Uh-huh.
David, can I ask you, what made you want to start writing? Was there something or someone who inspired you? I mean, you're a seasoned academic writer. So how did the journey from psychotherapy to fiction come about?
Well, I have to go back to my childhood, which is something us therapists do. My best friend's father was a writer, and he had an office full of books, floor to ceiling, papers everywhere, and it was clearly his workspace, and I could see him at work.
Yeah.
And whenever my friend and I would pass by his office, he'd welcome us in and chat with us about how the day was going. And what I realized is I felt included in his work. And my father went off to work in the morning, came back in the evening, and didn't talk much about work. And I realized I was excluded from his work. I really had no idea what he was doing. Yeah. So that think about being included and seeing him at work, and he was just available to us and chatting with us, and I thought, oh, that's a pretty nifty kind of job to have. So that was what got me started.
That's lovely. Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to think back on something that's sort of a germ of something started so young, and that you've been able to fulfill that alongside your sort of more traditional career in psychotherapy.
I wasn't, truth be told, a very good student. And thinking
you weren't a good student, did you?
I was, well, not to my teachers. Thinking about it now, I realized I didn't feel included. I was taught to, not with. And so it wasn't until I got to UCLA, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, but I took a psychology course, and the professor had us break into dyads, small groups, and talk with each other. And I'd always gotten in trouble for talking with students during class. But now he was teaching in an engaging way, and by his method, teaching me that I could learn from my peers and not just from the person in the front of the room.
So that's interesting, because that thing that first inspired you, that inclusiveness, that followed right through to your later years. That's obviously something that's really important to you.
It is. And so I'm a big believer in relationships. It's sort of one of the things I learned in grad school, just how important is our relationship to ourselves, to others, to the world. And so I did academically write a relationship book, one for men, one for women. And I've worked a lot with teenagers, so I wrote another one for parents of teenagers. And I liked that writing, and I liked teaching classes, and I liked, and I still do, doing the therapy. But I realized they were a little confining. I wanted to find a way to take what I'd learned as a therapist and apply it in another way. And I love to read mysteries. I've been reading them all my life. And I thought, well, maybe I could apply what I've learned in another format. And so that's what got me to take an attempt at writing a mystery.
Denise, just you won't know this, but one of the things that I really love about David's books is that you can really see that therapeutic knowledge in his plots. Like he uses those as plot lines. And I've said this to David before, I've not seen any other author take, there are lots of tools and hooks that different authors use, and David has his own little thing, and that I think is unique to him, and I love that about his writing.
It makes me really intrigued to read some, actually.
You should. They're lovely. They really are.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you something, Louise, that you told me is I do try to sneak in these little therapy lessons, but I don't want them to sound like it's a self-help book.
Yeah.
But you told me that one of the phrases that I use in my book, you use, and that's the phrase horribilizer.
Yeah. And my husband said to me the other day, is that I was talking about like someone and saying, oh, they're just horribilizing, and he said, is that a word? And I said, yes, it's a word, and it's a word that I learned from somebody else. I didn't just make it up, and he's a therapist and a teacher, so it's definitely a word.
It's a real word. Yeah. It's a good word.
Yeah, so and it's a phenomena, horribilizing. I think we could all relate to that, but we've got something and we just make it way worse than it is. And so,
and these sneak into your stories, these little ideas, these little nuggets, and so that you're reading. I'm like, I'll be working through the book and I'll come up this little thing, and I think one of the things I sometimes have to do is just rein David in a bit, because sometimes he gets so excited about a thing that he loves about therapy that he forgets that he maybe gets a bit distracted from the mystery, and I'm like,
so you need to rein him back in
I just
again.
need to put sometimes like say, oh, how about, and but absolutely still letting that voice come through, because it
sounds like quite a unique voice, actually, with that.
It really is. And I think we're going to talk about this later, but David, you write in first person, don't you?
I do.
So it is a very immediate voice.
Yeah. Well, the reason I did that was one of the authors that I like, who you may or may not know, a fellow by the name of Kinky Friedman. He's a country western singer, and he has a band, and he took up writing mysteries, and in the mysteries he's himself, but he put himself in Greenwich Village, New York, but he's a musician, and he gets wrapped up into these mysteries. And President Clinton said he was one of his favorite authors, and he's very funny, very irreverent, a little naughty, but I loved that he was himself in his books, and I thought, let me take a shot at that. So I've done that.
Yeah. So David, Louise tells me that your protagonist Sleuth actually shares your name. So how much of him is you, and vice versa? And was that decision to develop him like that as a result directly of reading those books? Kinky, yeah.
Kinky, yes. He's a name you can remember,
It certainly is.
Not his last name, but who was that guy? Kinky something or other.
Yeah. You always remember that.
I know that in mysteries, that the protagonist needs to have some flaw, some issue that becomes a challenge for them in the solving of the mystery. Sort of like when Indiana Jones had the issue with snakes, and he goes, oh no, not snakes, but then he has to go through a whole field of snakes to get to the other side. So I thought, well, what do I'm not flawless, so I had a few different things I could choose from. I decided I tend to rush things, and I want to get to the point already. Come on, move on. So I thought, okay, well, why don't I make that an issue that with this character? And he doesn't like foreplay. He wants to finish the meal before he starts it. He wants to get on with it already. So
always
I do
in a rush, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's always in a rush to get things over with already.
And just to say as well, Denise, that this character, David in the books, you know, he always he has a habit of telling people that he'll apologize for it. So he'll say, like, you know, look, I'm sorry that I'm just going to go straight in here because I don't like foreplay, and and so you sometimes see these kind of little battles that he has with people while he's building relationships with them, because he'll be kind of trying to sort of, you know, explain his flaws, and the characterization so lovely.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Well, I think, you know, as a therapist, I'm inclined to self-reflection. So it's sort of like, I know this is an issue for me, and yet I can't stop myself.
Yeah.
I'd like to think I exaggerated a little bit in the book, but those who know me well may say, no, that's a pretty good representation.
Yeah. But can I just go back to something I asked you a little bit earlier? I'm about sort of ideas for your books. I mean, in terms of the actual sort of individual plots that you've done with the books you've written so far, what's your inspiration there in terms of, you know, like the settings and stuff like that?
Right. Well, the first book I wrote was called A Lesson in Sex and Murder. They're all called A Lesson in Something because I am a teacher and I do want the books to have a little bit of a lesson in them. Mm-hmm. But I was a new professor at this university, and the academic dean called me into their office and said, our human sexuality teacher has had an emergency and they can't teach the course, and we'd like you to teach it. And so since I was the new kid on the block, I said, sure. And I figured, you know, it's sex. You know, I know a little bit about that. But it didn't take me long to realize I knew sort of backseat sex. I didn't know front seat sex. And so that was sort of, you know, and people are interested in reading about sex. I thought, well, this is something I could write about. So that part is all the truth, but I made up this part where I sent my character to a convention where they're sex therapists, and they go there to learn about how to teach graduate students to work with people around their sexual issues. So that was the backdrop for the first book. And I thought, well, this is good.
Oh, and by the way, Denise, someone got murdered.
Oh, along the way.
Right. Along the way.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's always a murder in the
There is.
Good to know.
Yeah, well, I have a little misgivings about all the murders. So, but since it is a mystery, they usually don't want the mystery of why the inflation is what it is or whatever. You know, they want the mystery of like when it gets killed and what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I think sex and murder are a pretty good combination. Really, they're pretty reliable.
Yeah. So that was the first one, and what I liked about it was that the conference was time limited, and I'm not going to talk to you about my dissertation, but my.
I've told David that we might not go down that line because it does come up though. Yeah, David's interested in time.
My character jokes about it frequently, but one of the things with the dissertation was it was about time and how the task expands and contracts to fit the time available, which I actually learned from a UK civil servant. They wrote a book about that, which inspired me. Oh. So, like if they tell you have a week to do something, it takes a week. If they tell you a day, it takes a day. So I thought, well, I'll put myself in a time-limited place, and I need to solve the mystery by the end of the event.
Right.
So the first one was a sex conference. I went to a music festival. And then I went to a mystery writers conference, which I'd love to talk about if you have a minute. I'll just say, the Mystery Writers of America have an annual convention. And I thought, oh, how cool. Let me go where all these mystery writers are and have a mystery at the mystery writers. And,
so did you actually go to one in real life?
A long time ago.
Okay.
So I hadn't been to one recently, but I thought sometimes I write about things I know nothing about, and that doesn't stop me though. So, but I knew that sometimes people have these parties where they have a mystery at their party and everybody sort of gets a role to play and you have to guess who done it at the party.
Yeah.
I've never been to one of those. But I bought a game of, that you could buy to host one of those parties. And I thought, oh, why don't I go to this mystery conference? And at the mystery conference, they play this game.
Yeah, so, like dressing up Cluedo, isn't it?
Almost. Yeah. So but then so that was kind of exciting for me. But then I had this thought, which was sort of terrifying and very exhilarating. I thought, well, look, there are going to be 300 some people at this convention, and they're going to have to break people into all these groups so that every group has 10 people and they all have to solve the mystery. And I said, well, why not have in each group, why not have a Sherlock Holmes? Why not have a Miss Marple? Why not have a Clouseau? So if they ever make a movie of this book, I think it'll be very funny because you're going to have 30 Inspector Clouseaus.
30 Nancy Drews and
Nancy Drews are there. So that was kind of fun. So anyway, I like to put my characters in a time-limited place and see what happens to them.
I think that's a really good tip for some perhaps some independent authors who are new to writing and who are struggling to think of a way of containing their plots. I think that, I mean, I'm not saying of course you don't have to do it like that, but that focusing on some sort of way, some sort of mechanism whereby there's a natural time is
like Murder on the Orient Express or something. You have to solve it by the time you get to the end of the line, don't you?
Yeah.
I suppose that makes you really focus on how you pace your book and how you structure the narrative in it as well.
Right. Well, I sometimes when I write these books, I go, okay, this thing ends on Friday, and I go, oh wow, it's Thursday, and I don't have a clue.
Yeah, you got to get your thinking hat on then, haven't you?
I do.
So, David, can we talk a little bit about your actual writing process? About where and when you carry out your writing, since you don't do it full time, and maybe who you use as a sounding board for your stories and plots.
Sure. Well, ever since I got my first typewriter when I was, I don't know, in my early teens, I've loved to write. And I used to love to write letters to people. And so I've always enjoyed writing. And as I said, I was inspired by my friend's dad. So I try to write every day. I've had years where I've had months when I haven't written, but for the most part, I want to write every day. I don't care how much I write. I don't particularly care when I write, but it's like a magnet that draws me to it. So I really enjoy the writing, and more I'm enjoying it. And now I'm spending more and more time with it. So sometimes when I'm writing, when I start a book, I have a sentence, maybe a paragraph about what the book is going to be about, but I don't really know. Like I go, okay, I'm going to go to this convention with the different detectives, and somebody's going to get killed and something's going to happen. So sometimes when I write, I know what the next few scenes are going to be, and I get really excited. So I wake up early, and I got to get in there right. Other times I have no idea what I'm going to do next. I feel stuck and I'm not liking the book, but I know I got to slug it out and just get there and write. And I was taught as a therapist, you have to start where you are. So if I don't know where I am, that's where I'm starting, and I figure it'll come.
That's really interesting.
Sorry, Louise.
I was just going to say quickly that you're in good company, because I've been listening to. I'm always quite interested in whether authors really plan deeply an outline or whether they kind of pants it. You know, that have you heard that phrase, David? Pantsing? When you fly by the seat of your pants. And so authors like you and Harlan Coben and I think Lee Child, you all do it the same way. You start and you go. Whereas someone like David Baldacci or I think James Patterson, people like them, they and Jeffrey Deaver, he's another one. They plan every chapter, every scene, and only once they've got that really detailed outline done, do they then actually write the book. So it's sort of half written in an outline version, and neither is wrong or right. It's just different personalities and what works.
Well, when I was in grad school, I was taught to trust the process, which basically means trust yourself. So what works for me may not work for you. So I found this really works for me, and I trust. And what I like about it is it's a mystery to me. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I find that I've heard people say that before, that they start writing and they don't know what's going to happen. And I find that magical almost. I can't imagine how that actually works. I think if I were ever to write, I would be a planner. I think I definitely would. But I love this idea that you can start and it's a journey and you don't know where your characters are going to take you. And if you hit a block, that you'll write your way through that and come out the other side, and it may not be where you imagined it, but it will move your story on somehow. I find that absolutely fascinating.
It requires such courage in a sense. To me, that's how it feels. It requires such courage and passion, I guess, because you have to be really trust your creativity, I think.
Well, when you meet somebody, we're doing this together. We're trusting that this will lead to that. And I think it's the same thing. When you meet people and you meet your characters in the book, you learn who they are and they have a way of doing things. And for me, I don't really know who my characters are until the second draft, because then I sort of have a better sense of it. Plus, I don't know who done it until the end of the book. So
I find that amazing that you start writing a mystery and you don't know who done it when you start it.
Well, I don't know who done or who did it or how they did it. I don't know any of that.
David, you mentioned there that you don't know who your characters are until you get to your second draft. So how do you go about that revision process? How many drafts do you tend to create before you actually send it out for editing, before it ends up with Louise?
Sure. Let me answer that, but I want to tell you one other thing that I found from you writing. When I started to write the self-help books, I tried to think, well, who reads self-help books? And I pictured some middle-aged reader in the middle of the country who I had no idea who they were, but I tried to write for them. And I got, I don't know who that person is. So when I write the mysteries now, I have one really good friend who I know will read them. And so I write for him because he's
that's lovely. That
he's
really
the person
is.
I'm going to be talking with him about it, and he's going to know the references. He's going to know this. And I go, well, yeah, not everybody's going to know everything, but he will. And I think if he likes it, others will too. So
and do you use him as a sounding board, David? Do you?
No.
No. Okay. That was a quick answer.
Well, no, sometimes I do. The book about the mystery took place in Las Vegas, and he and I went to Las Vegas and we did a, sort of scouted it out for the book. And so I gave him like the first 20 pages to look at, and he gave me some feedback. But really, the person who's my sounding board is my wife, because every day in the evening, we take a walk and we walk our dog, and she talks about her life and what's going on. And I realize sometimes I'm not talking about my life, I'm talking about my book. And so I go, these people and they're here and they're doing this, but I don't know what comes next. And she said, well, why wouldn't they do this? And I go, oh, that's good. So she gets credit, you know.
Yeah. She's like your sort of like a dog walking writing partner.
Right. Yeah. So when in terms of the drafts, I do the first one. I just go through, and I remember. I think I'm going to blank on which author said this, but their philosophy was they threw up in the morning and cleaned up in the afternoon.
I like that.
So I sort of let the first draft be the throw up. I just put it all there, and I don't look back very much. I just keep moving through it. So I just use the first draft to get something down there. The second draft is really when I go, oh, I have a better sense of who this character is, and I start to tweak it a little bit, and I bring in some nuance to them, and I realize, oh, this needs to happen before that, and then this over here. So that's when that's when I discover if I like the book or not. You know? Right. So unfortunately, I have so far, but I there are times when I write the book when I go, this is dreck, and other times when I go, this is wonderful. So I don't really feel like I'm not a good judge, but when I read that the second time through, I get a better sense of what works and what doesn't. Then I go through it again a third time, and I thought I had a formula. Like, I'll do 5 drafts, and then I'll send it to Louise. But then I did one. I said, this is pretty good after the third draft I'm sending. So I said, oh, now I'm getting better. I can do 3 drafts. And then the next one I did 7. So I realized.
That's a really good point, though, that I'm assuming that therefore that suggests to me that you're learning from your writing and your self-editing, and also Louise's editing, so that as you progress through the books that you write, it requires less of you each time, because you're getting better at it because of the feedback you're getting and the skills that you're learning as a writer as you go along.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'd like to think that's true. I'm not 100%. It's like, if you look at all the red on my what I said, Louise, you might have a second thought about that. But yeah, I do think, because when Louise edits it, what I've learned about editing is, well, all right. What I've learned about editing is editors are readers, and I'm not a reader. I'm a creator, and all my words are precious to me, and don't take that away. But she's reading it as a reader, and she goes, this is not helping the plot, this is not moving it along, this tangent that you're waxing on here, David, is interesting, but who cares? So she be more on the straight and narrow. So when I edit her version of it, I can really see where she's streamlined it and moved it along a lot better. So then I edit it, and then what Louise has taught me is, as good as she is and as good as I'm getting, we need somebody else at the end to tidy it up and make sure all the I's are dotted and whatnot. Then I send again to somebody else, and then I read it after they get it. And then I have one last thing that I do after that I'm going to answer for you a little bit later. I'll keep you in suspense.
It's a really important thing there, though, that first of all, I just wanted to go back to something you said a few minutes ago about how you start just not by worrying about, you just push it out there. That's the first thing. You just write. And I think that's a really valuable lesson for all authors, because if an author's worrying too much about nitty gritty and too much about always that line crafted perfectly at the first draft, it could be that interferes with just the absolute foundational basic story. And I love the fact that you take that first draft and think of it in terms of, this is where I just go bleh, and you put everything into it, and it's later that kind of refinement process comes in.
Well, I never used to, pardon me for saying this, until I wrote my dissertation, I never handed in anything other than my first draft. So that was the only thing I'd ever written for school that I ever took the time to do more than once. So now I'm sort of learning the value of looking at something a second, third, fourth, fifth time, and I can see how it improves with each reading. So,
and I think that's another. Sorry, David. I think that's another really very important point that you raised there for newer writers, is that very often their only experience of their writing being read by somebody else is handing it in at school to be marked by a teacher, and that's marked on the basis of whether the teacher regards something as right or wrong, and that fear sometimes of handing the work over holds writers back, because they anticipate that their editor's response is going to be the same as a teacher's, and that's not what an editor's role is. And as I'm sure you found out working with Louise, we don't mark work and send it back. It's a collaborative process, and I think it's really nice to hear you say that that's not what it is for you, because that's not what it should be for anybody who works with an editor. So it's nice to hear that.
Yeah, the marking, not the collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Sorry, just clarify that for me there.
We're a team, and that we're working together to make it as good as it can be. So I don't think students see their teacher as a teammate. You know, they're like the other side. They're not, even though I think teachers are on your side, I don't think students feel that so much. And
it's a different relationship, isn't it?
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
Just also sort of going back to that thing that we were going to speak a little bit more about, but that you mentioned, because this issue of that author editor relationship, that's another thing that I think some authors at the beginning of if they've got no experience of being editor before, they're often really nervous about it. I had one author describe it to me as when they received when they knew that the revised version of the manuscript was in their inbox, they had to really stop themselves feeling as if someone was going to be telling them that their baby was fat. That was kind of the way she framed it. And and I was I think it's quite interesting to hear your experiences of how you handle that process of your novel being going to a third party, and how that makes you feel in terms of anxiety, and what advice you might give to authors who are holding back from working with an editor because they're afraid.
Well, I think people are afraid. We're afraid of people not liking us, accepting us, valuing us. I think the fear is genuine. And as an author, I think authors have the experience of how hard it is to get rid and edit their own words. I have paragraphs that I have to take out, and I go, oh, I don't want to do this. And I actually cut and paste them, and I have a little file of things I want to use sometime, but that file is getting bigger and bigger, and I go, oh, I don't think I'll ever get around to that. But I do think, I'm afraid that you're going to say that my baby is fat, because they're beautiful in my eyes, but I only see the beauty, and you can sort of get through that. And as I said, you're the reader, and you're going to say, it's beautiful, but it could be even prettier if you did this or did that. What I was afraid with editors is editor A would say this, and editor B would say that, and editors, like, everybody has their own opinion. And then
because it is subjective, it absolutely is. I mean, especially not at proofreading stage, but I think at line level stage, the work that Denise and I both specialize in, me from fiction point of view and her from a non-fiction, but it is subjective to a degree.
Sure. And please don't listen to this part. I don't take all of your suggestions. I take the vast, vast majority of them, but some of them I look at and go, I'm keeping that.
Yeah, and that's absolutely your prerogative.
Right. And well, it's my baby.
Yeah.
So,
and if you want it to be fat, then you can there's times when it can be fat.
I like my books a little chubby.
That's great. David, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us about your process as an author and getting your insight in the relationship that you have with Louise as your editor. I think for our listeners who are also independent authors, it's really helpful for them to hear how other people approach writing and being edited, because we can always learn from other people's experience.
Can I add in something there, Denise? One thing I thought our listeners might be interested in is that when we started working together, David, before he made a decision, David asked if he could have a Skype call with me, and because he wanted to meet me, and obviously he's in Southern California and I'm in the wilds of East Anglia, in 6,000 miles away or whatever. And I'd be interested to hear your view on this, David. But certainly for me, I thought it was I was even more thrilled when you decided to work with me, because I felt I'd got to know you a little. Just we only had an hour together or something, but I did feel that I was working with a human being and someone who I liked, and I thought that was a really good foundation to the start of the process.
It's funny to hear you say that, because I would have thought that's the norm. For me, it's like, who am I working with here? I need to know you. I want to feel that we're on the same page, that you get my sensibilities, and that you understand me. And so I think it was critical. I wouldn't have worked with you if I hadn't had that opportunity to get
So if I had
you.
said to you, like, no, I don't do Skype calls, that would have scuppered things quite early. That would have.
I would have said, thank you very much for sharing that, and goodbye.
Yeah. And I think that's important, because for any editors listening to this, because I do know some editors don't like the idea of having Skype conversations. They want to do it all by email, and they don't want to have phone conversations. They won't do phone conversations on. I don't know about you, Denise, but I always think if an author wants that, there's a reason why they want it. And
yeah. I don't necessarily offer it up front, but if that's what the author wants, that's what they get. Yeah.
Well, there is there's no correct right way to do this. Once again, it's what works for you, and that's what worked for me. If somebody else, they don't need that, they don't need that. But for me, as I said, I'm so much about relationships that I needed to go, oh, Louise and I, we get along, we understand each other, this is good.
Yeah, that's great.
I have to say one thing, because I left you in suspense about the last little piece of my editing process, which I gather we're going to be talking about in another podcast, and that is I have a narrator, and I get to look at the book again when I work with my narrator, but I'll save that rest of that story for another day.
Well, that's a little teaser. Yes, Thank you for that, David. That's going to hook people into the next time you talk to us.
Or make sure that they don't come at all.
No. People are going to be intrigued now, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
So now it's time for Editing Bites. This is our regular feature where we recommend a tool or resource to help you on your writing journey. So Louise, what have you got for us this week?
So my editing bite is dedicated to David, because it's come up in conversation a few times during the editing process of his books, and it's about the issue of including lyrics in fiction. So there's a great article on the Book Baby website that offers some excellent advice on the matter, and it's called How to Legally Quote Song Lyrics in Your Book.
Great. And mine is How to Write a Memoir That People Care About, which is a post on the NY Book Editors blog. Memoirs can be quite tricky to structure in a way that's engaging, and I think this post has some great advice on technique.
Great one. So that's it. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Editing Podcast. You can rate, review and subscribe to us via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever platform you prefer.
And we'll put all the links we've mentioned in the show notes so you can grab everything there. And thank you, David, once again for being our guest.
Thank you, David. It's been an absolute joy.
Bye.
Bye-bye.